Okay, welcome to the week 3 go-to session. This is the third of 4 go-to sessions we're going to hold for the month. Um, Today, I want to talk basically about a couple different things. First, peer review, because this is the main activity we're going to be working on this week. And then, yes, finally, we'll get into taking a glimpse at the final project. Remember, there's only one essay that you're writing for this course. You already handed it in, ideally, on Sunday. But that's it. As I said, I think in an earlier session, there's a lot of sneaky writing in this class. So you end up doing a lot more writing than you think in the form of discussion board posts, um, the essay, the planning that will be involved when it comes to the final project that we'll start talking about today, the various other small things that you do, messaging me. Lots of people go back and forth with questions and such. So you do more of the writing than you think, but you only have one formal essay for the month. And now we're going to take that sort of raw material. Remember, you chose a topic during week 1, you narrowed it down, you wrote about it for your essay and did some research into it, hopefully becoming a mini expert uh, on your topic. And now it's time to take it in and transform it into a completely different animal, which is the multimedia public service announcement. So, yes, you'll be creating an actual PSA. Um, and we'll get into the format, the different choices you have a little bit later. But first, I do want to talk about peer review because that is the main activity for this week. Okay, so there's the agenda for today. Peer review, we'll talk a little bit more about the final projects. And as always, we'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers. Excuse me. So let's talk about peer review. How many of you have participated in some version of peer-to-peer feedback? Maybe you took a previous high school English class. Maybe you've taken a college level English class somewhere else. How many of you have done peer review before? Um, Maybe you did like a workshop version, a sort of full body exercise where the whole class looks at a student's work together. And then as a class, you give feedback. Or what's perhaps more common is that you're put into groups of 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 people. You exchange papers and you sort of give each other feedback either on your own or by following a set of guided questions that the instructor has given you. Okay, so Sylvia says that she hasn't. Nobody else has practiced peer review before. It's fairly common, I think. Um, Eric says PMA. I have no idea what that means. Okay, but if you haven't done peer review, that's fine. I'll give a sort of crash course into it now. One of the things I like about peer review in an online class like this one is that in the classroom, sometimes, listen, I think peer review is awesome. I think it's a great opportunity to give people feedback. I don't mean that just theoretically. I think that it's actually one of the more useful activities one can do. But in the classroom, it can sometimes feel like busy work. Not that it isn't an important activity, but you know, it's been a long day. um, at Full Sail, especially, classes can sometimes last like 8 hours. And when you're put into a group to sort of exchange work and give each other feedback, if you're not feeling up to it, it can feel sort of like a burden. Um, and giving each other copies of one's essay and then having to read it in real time and give feedback. Um, it's challenging to do it when it feels like you have to do it right then and there. And the great thing about doing it online is that you have the luxury of being able to respond when you more or less wish. Okay, this activity is already open. It's due Sunday. As always, I encourage people not to wait until the very last second on Sunday to start responding to each other's work. But the good news is you have the entire week to sort of work on this. So if you read someone's paper and you know you want to respond to it, but you're not quite sure what to say or how, you can sort of call a timeout. You can wander away, right? You can go take a walk. You can go buy a burrito. You can go listen to some music or something, and then come back to it when you're ready to respond. So that's what I like about online peer review is that it doesn't happen in real time. So there's really no excuse for not being able to give thoughtful feedback because you have so much time to do it and you're not on the clock. Okay, but let's talk about peer review in general first, like in terms of what sorts of help you expect from your classmates. So I'll ask that to you guys, okay? You can either raise your hand and speak out loud or use the chat function down below. But for example, what kind of feedback is not helpful? Okay, so think about past experience or just use intuition. If you haven't participated in peer review, that's fine. But think of the sorts of feedback that is not helpful. Like what makes you look like the woman in this photo here with the classic face palm gesture? Uh, Terard says opinions. Okay, I agree. I think I know what you mean by that. Opinions can be important, but if it seems like it's entirely rooted in the other person's subjective experiences, like that might not be tremendously helpful. It could be, but if you get this sense that the writer is just speaking from, uh, right, just sort of personal stance rather than really looking at the piece for what it is. I know that's the biggest challenge for me too as an instructor. Um, I sometimes don't have to absolutely love your topic or agree with your what you have to say about it, but that doesn't matter because ultimately I have other things I can look at and respond to. Andre says negative criticism. Okay, I think I know what that means. We do expect people to give feedback, right? We expect constructive feedback, which means that we're not just rubber stamping each other's work and saying, "Hey, great job," or "I would give this an A if I were the instructor." Right? That's not feedback. That's just you sort of. And we'll talk about how it's important to give positive feedback and stress what's working well. But that doesn't mean we can't offer suggestions for improvement or point out moments where we felt confused or moments where we thought the writer could have backed up her claims more. We can certainly point those things out. But yeah, if they're too negatively worded, um, that can seem a bit problematic. Anything else we should add to this list? People said opinions. People said when the feedback is too negative. Anything else that's not very helpful? As I take a sip from my Diet Coke, Eric says yes, compliments as opposed to actual feedback. Okay, yeah. I mean, compliments are nice, and I do think it's important to talk about what's working well. Uh, but yeah, there is a sense that sometimes, and I'm not saying it's malicious. Sometimes people just don't know. They don't know what to look for. They don't know what to concentrate on. And I'll give some tips on what you should be examining and what you should look at. So I'm not saying that the student is exactly ignoring her responsibilities. Um, Sometimes they're just trying to be nice, or sometimes they can't see anything quote unquote wrong, so they just focus on what's working well. Uh, but even then, and I'll kind of add something to Eric's comments here, where he says compliments as opposed to actual feedback. I think the actual feedback part is important. Whether we're pointing out something that's working well or something that needs improvement, being specific is super important. Because if you give if you give the sense that you haven't read things carefully, I mean, think back to that fancy Greek word ethos, which I've been pushing a lot. Remember, I said if you don't do quality research for your essay, it could affect your ethos because the reader could get the impression that you're not quite an authority on the topic or that you're just writing off the top of your head. The same thing with peer review. If you've written something and you're looking for decent feedback, it can be a bit shocking if you only receive general sort of non-specific comments, whether they're entirely positive or even if they're trying to be somewhat critical. If they're non-specific, that's typically not very helpful. Okay, so I think we stressed the biggies there, right? Stuff that's too rooted in opinion, stuff that's overwhelmingly negative, things that are not specific, people who are just saying "great job" and not really saying much more about that. So what kind of feedback is helpful? What sort of feedback makes you look like the happy young people in the photo here? Well, it's pretty much the complete opposite of everything we've mentioned, right? Feedback should be very, very specific. Feedback should be a balance of what's working well and what could be improved. Um, Helpful feedback isn't completely written from the student's own opinions. Um, And by the way, when for this week's main activity, and we'll get into the specific details of what you need to do in a second, um, but it'll be a discussion board kind of similar to week one, where you'll be looking at each other's work and giving feedback. And just like in week one, yes, one of the challenges will be to sort of stay focused. That your job is to give each other feedback on what they've produced, All right, so the quality of the overall writing. Is there a clear thesis or call to action in place? Is the entire piece sort of reading as a cohesive whole? Um, is it clear what the writer is asking a specific audience to do about the issue that's chosen? It's week 3, so hopefully a lot of this stuff is has been narrowed down. But I mean, if it's week 3 and you're still not sure what the call to action is, or the topic still seems fuzzy, like these are things that the reader needs to hear. But the reader does not need to hear as much about the topic itself. So if someone's writing about computer animation, your task is not to get caught up in a discussion of Frozen or Tangled or Big Hero 6, right? If the person is writing about music, it's not it's not your place to really get into a discussion of hip hop music or who's topping the country charts. I don't mind a sentence or two that kind of touches on these things. I think it's fine to be friendly and to show the other person that you actually care about their topic, but that's not the main task. Okay, my first tip in terms of getting peer reviews to think about feedback is falling into one of two broad categories. On the left here is what I like to call higher order concerns. Um, this is kind of like the big stuff. So thesis, content, organization, right? The very things I stressed. Thesis in this class is your call to action, what you're asking a specific audience to do about your problem. If there isn't a thesis in place, the reader probably needs to hear this. Content, which refers to basically all the stuff that's in the paper. We've already talked quite a bit about introductions and how they function, but also the bulk of the paper itself, the body of the paper, our topics being handled sort of one piece at a time. Do the topics seem to be, or do the points seem to be well supported by a mixture of the writer's own commentary and outside research and support? Is the entire thing like reading like one cohesive whole? So big picture stuff falls under higher order concerns. Lower order concerns, which I have to the right here, is the smaller stuff: grammar, sentence structure, proofreading, style. It's not that this stuff is not important, okay? But it's of less importance. After all, if we have big questions on the left here concerning higher order concerns, it's probably not as useful to focus on smaller stuff like, oh, look, there's a spelling error, or oh my gosh, the comma goes here, not here. Because chances are some of those sentences might need to be rewritten entirely if there's some major things on the left here. Also, as I just mentioned, you've already written the essay, okay? This was your one major formal writing assignment for the month. Okay, so the essay is done, and we're moving on to the next assignment, which is to take your essay and change it completely into a completely different animal, which will be the multimedia public service announcement. So you're not handing in the essay again. Okay, this isn't a traditional English class where you write a paper, get feedback, revise appropriately, and hand it back in again. And because of that, probably less attention needs to go here to the smaller stuff. I'm not saying it needs to be ignored completely. After all, when you create your multimedia PSA, there will be writing involved, and there will need to be attention to detail, and you'll certainly want to proofread your work and all that stuff. So I don't think it's that we need to ignore lower order concerns, but they get lesser emphasis because they just play less of a role here. Okay. I should also say that sometimes students, if they feel uncomfortable with giving feedback, they love to stay here on the right with the lower order concerns. They love to point out when a word is misspelled or when there's some sort of small grammar issue. Again, that's fine, but that should sort of be a very small portion of your overall response. Typically, there's more to say than just proofreading issues. Okay, here's some quick feedback tips. These might appear in a quiz question. Feedback tip number 1, be positive, okay? Especially since we're in an online environment. I mean, I need to follow this as well. I mean, I try my best. I always proofread what I say, not just for errors, but for tone, because we're not seeing each other face to face. We don't have the usual nonverbal cues that can help another person out. Things like a smile, the quality of one's voice as they're speaking. A lot of that doesn't come through in writing, so you have to be careful that your words are coming across the right way. And also, being positive just means that you should come into giving feedback on a person's work when you're ready to. Okay. You should be looking at another person's work in the most generous terms possible. I don't mean the most generous in terms of you're insincerely going to be kind or false. No, no, no. I just mean you should come into it with a positive mindset. Um, you're going to look at the paper for what it is. You're going to try to look at it in the best light possible and then give feedback. That's what I try to do with all of you guys. I never sit down, open up someone's paper and think, okay, what's wrong with this? What needs to be fixed? What did the student mess up on? Okay, I never enter an activity like that. I always look at it as, I'm excited to read this. Um, and I hope that it's working well for the most part. And along the way, yeah, if I notice things, I'll try to point them out to be helpful. But the point is to always be positive. Feedback number 2, okay, be specific. This might be the most important piece of advice. Be specific. If something's working well, be very specific, excuse me, about what it is that's working well. If something needs improvement, be specific. Don't just say, oh, I was confused. Explain where and why you felt confusion. Okay, so we're trying to avoid sort of vague, sweeping, general comments about someone's work and replace it with very, very specific comments. Number 3, when giving criticism, right? When giving constructive feedback, use softeners and qualifiers. Does that make sense when I say use softeners and qualifiers? Like, what does that mean? Why do I have pillows here that spelled the word love, Love? Maybe it's too easy of a question. Nathan says, don't come across too harsh in your feedback. Yes, good, exactly. Andre says the same thing. Don't be too harsh and destroy someone. Yeah, and again, lots of times we do this unintentionally, right? I mean, that's why I try to read over my work and make sure that I'm being okay in terms of tone. And listen, sometimes even I mess up and I read back over what I've written. I'm like, wow, I could have worded that a little bit better. But at least if you're aware of it, the chances are you'll catch yourself. And so softeners and qualifiers mean that we put little things in our writing to sort of indicate that we're being less harsh than maybe we appear to be, right? So I do it all the time with you guys. I'll say like, "Oh, I was a bit confused here," or "I was a little bit fuzzy on this point that you made here." Right? I'm always adding these softeners, these phrases. I try to avoid emoticons because that's not really professional. But very occasionally I'll use those too, just so people don't misinterpret. Again, if you're just faced with someone's words, those words can come across harsh, even if you didn't intend them that way. But if we can use softeners and qualifiers and really work on our tone, then the other person will be more willing to listen to what we have to say. Okay, so those are the 3 feedback tips. Keep those in mind. They might appear in a question. Quiz question number 1. What are higher order concerns versus lower order concern? And what are those 3 tips for giving feedback? Okay, so we just spent some time over the last, 4 slides defining what the difference is between higher order concerns and lower order concerns. And what are the 3 tips for giving feedback? Okay, moving on. Let's start talking about the final project where you create an actual public service announcement. Your goal is to create a PSA, much like you see in the real world. You turn on the television, boom, there's an anti-smoking PSA. Right, the Super Bowl happened recently, and I think we might have used this as an example in week 1. It's not that we literally saw public service announcements, but we saw things that were pretty darn close, like that commercial about what was it? The woman on the phone, right, ordering pizza, but she's not really ordering pizza. She's trying to reach out for help. So that had a sort of public service announcement feel to it. There's another Super Bowl commercial that kind of worked that way. That insurance commercial where the kid is speaking to the camera about how he's died because I forget what the message was. The home wasn't set up safely enough, or Right? I think that was the message. So we see PSAs all around us. We see them on television. We hear them on the radio. We can be thumbing through a magazine, and there's a print style ad that actually is a public service announcement. So your job is to create one yourself. And here in this image here is just a reminder that we really do see PSAs all around us. So here's a billboard, okay, a real world billboard. Hug and don't slug. There's no excuse for domestic violence, right? If your hugging is turned to slugging, we can help. Call this number. Um, okay, it's a pretty spare public service announcement, but it meets all the qualifications. We have a clear problem or issue, right? Domestic violence. Um, we have a clear a clear audience. If your hugging has turned to slugging, we can help. So it's not addressed to everyone, right? It's specifically addressed to people who are directly involved. When it says if your hugging has turned to slugging, it almost sounds like it's speaking to the people who are perpetrating domestic violence, but it sounds like it's really to anybody who's currently caught up in such a difficult situation, right? And there's a targeted message. Call this number, right? Hug, don't slug. Call this number. So it meets all the basic requirements for a PSA. And as I've said since week one, don't get confused. The PSA is deceptively simple. Find a problem, raise awareness about that problem, ask a specific audience to do something about it. Um, yes, your topics are a bit more complicated, and you'll explore them in formats that are a bit more complex in this billboard, but essentially you're doing what this billboard is doing. Your topics are just a little bit larger than that. Okay, so let's talk about the different options you have, which I try to capture here visually. So there's a song option, there's an audio kind of podcast style option, there's a comic option, there's a film option. And let me get away from this a second and bring up the actual options sheet. Okay. Oh, here's the main page, right? Our activities page. Um, it looks like for this specific section, lots of people have already posted, but the 3.3 peer review discussion board, this is where you need to submit your paper. So I'm going to go into the board real quickly. It looks like 15 people have already posted to the board. So that's a good chunk of the class. Okay. And I sent out an announcement about this yesterday, reminding people. But yeah, you just have to post your paper. A couple people have given links to their documents. Other people, it doesn't seem to be happening in this class. Other people literally just copy and paste the entire thing onto the board, which isn't happening here. But okay, either way is fine. We just need a way to get your essay. But yeah, you have to take the essay that you handed in Sunday and post it to the peer review discussion board. Okay. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot something super important. Let's take a look at the peer review assignment sheet. I forgot to explain what you what you need to do. Okay, so here's the assignment sheets, due dates and stuff like that. Don't freak out too much about this. I mean, ideally, you should have your draft posted by today to the board. It would be nice if people started responding even before the weekend, but technically everything's due Sunday. And there are two requirements, okay? You choose one classmate to respond to, just one. So unlike previous discussion boards, you don't have to choose two people. If you want to respond to more than one person, great. If you want to go for I can't literally give you bonus points, but it always makes me smile when people go above and beyond the minimum. So it's a good way to really secure all of the points possible if you do something like that. But you only have to respond to one, and there is a short reflection involved. Should I discuss it now or later? The reflection isn't that big of a deal. Reflection just means that when you get advice from someone, you then need to respond to that person, someone in depth, somewhat thoughtfully, reflecting and responding to their feedback, if that makes sense. So, for example, like Nathan just made a comment on the board. If Nathan receives some feedback from, let's say, Andre, I don't even know if Andre and Nathan are in the same class. I teach two classes, and we have a mixture of people from both classes here in the go-to sessions. But if Nathan receives a response from Andre, Nathan should respond to Andre on the board, replying to him, thanking him, and reflecting on the feedback that Andre gave him. Okay, that's what the reflection is. And also, I need to come up with a system, and I don't have one yet. So I'm just going to mention it here, and I'll also send it out as an announcement. Make sure when you go to the board that you give attention to someone who has not received feedback yet. What happens is that whoever's paper is near the top tends to get a ton of feedback, and then people whose work appears down below tends to get ignored. So try not to do that. Okay. Because ideally, it would be nice if everybody finds at least one other person to respond to, but that's not going to happen if 10 people all decide to respond to one person's essay. That means there will be like 9 other people that don't receive a response at all. Um, yeah, I need to develop a system. I just can't figure out how to do it. I don't really want to assign people a specific person to respond to because maybe that person, for example, doesn't post to the board or doesn't get the essay completed. So we're mostly working on the honor system. Just find someone to respond to and try to respond to someone who has not received feedback yet. And then once you receive feedback in return, respond to that person, thanking that person, and reflecting on what they've written to you. Okay, what makes sense about their feedback, what doesn't, how it will help you, etc. If you're doing that, you'll pretty much do well on this assignment. And if you don't receive feedback from someone, just respond to my feedback, okay? My feedback, which you should get sometime during the week, that will act as the thing you need to respond to as a reflection. And you can just send that to me as a message. And I'll send that out again as an announcement. I really need to fix this. Every month I keep doing the same system, which I kind of explain things in an announcement. But that's the gist of it, okay? Respond to at least one person, and when you get a response back, be sure that you respond to that with a reflection. If you're completely confused about what you should be covering when you look at another person's paper, the assignment sheet has these guiding questions here. Things that you should consider, like what is the thesis and appeal for action? You should be able to answer this. If you can't, you should probably communicate to the writer if these things are a little bit unclear. Do you see different appeals for action? Ethos, pathos, logos. Okay, if you don't, make suggestions on how they could be incorporated. By the way, here, I don't have some sort of firm requirement that ethos, pathos, and logos all need to exist in the paper and all exist in equal measure. No, no, no. Some papers might be more logos driven. Some papers might be more, appeal more to the heart. But in general, there should probably be at least some mixture of two of those things. So it's really more of a question to make sure that you see some of these elements taking place. Is the appeal for action clear? What is the writer asking the audience to do? What could the writer do to be even more successful in getting these things across? And then some general things like what did the writer do well, and what suggestions do you have? Okay, so you have these questions to go through if you need them. If you don't want to use those questions, that's fine too. Some people are great at just sort of looking at something and knowing how to respond. Either because they're pretty comfortable with writing issues, or maybe they're not that familiar with writing issues. They're just really good at seeing things. They're just really good at noticing things. Okay, so use the guiding questions if they help, but you certainly don't have to use them lockstep. Okay, you can also look at someone's work and just give the best darned response that you can, using your own sort of sense of what's working well and what needs improvement. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, the final project options. Okay, let's get back on track. You have this PDF. I believe it's under maybe the week 3 overview. Let's see. Let's find out. Someone help me out here. Oh, I hate it when this platform moves so slowly. Okay, so week 3 overview. Yeah, so the week 3 overview has this document called Final Project Options, and that's what I have open right here. It lists the different options you have for your final project. I'm not going to read through every word on this page, but I am going to quickly go through these and make some general comments. So your first option is you can create a short video, right? 1 to 3 minute film. So again, think about this would be like an imitation of the sort of PSAs you see on television, right? So typically those don't last longer than a minute or two. They certainly don't usually go past 3 minutes. So that's your job, to use 1 to 3 minutes to create a short film about your PSA topic. If you choose this option, it requires a script. Okay, so a script needs to be handed in with the final project. And music, sound effects, and voiceover should be used to enhance your video. The reason I require a script is twofold. One, I need to see more of your writing. Okay, so I said there's a lot of sneaky writing in your class. Well, there's a version of it. Um, Also, it helps me follow along. Like if I'm watching your film, it's much easier for me to sort of follow along with a script. But there's another big reason why I require a script, and it's for your benefit. If you're creating a script, it means that you're planning. It means that you're thinking through things in advance. It means you're heading into the project with a sort of structure in place, a blueprint, a game plan. And yeah, that's what I want to see, because the good news is I kind of shout so loud about this. I don't really have problems with students who do the opposite. But yeah, a long time ago, when I first started teaching this assignment, the PSA project, over a year ago, there would be people who would just literally turn on their laptop camera, speak impromptu, right, off the top of their heads for about a minute, stop the recording, and call that their short film. Okay, that's not a short film. That's just you turning on your laptop and speaking for a minute. So if you have things like a script, that's evidence of planning. So yeah, I want to see that, and obviously music, sound effects, having professional voiceover, that also adds to the professionalism of it. Um, and we'll talk a little bit about this, not just in this session, but in the week 4 session too. But the goal here is to create the best project that you can create. Okay, I'm not Steven Spielberg, so I'm not going to be looking at your film through the eyes of like a professional filmmaker. Later, we'll get into these. There's an option to write a short song. I'm not Adam Levine from The Voice. I'm not one of those reality music show judges, so I'm not going to be listening to your song in that way. But I do expect you to create the best project you can, and that typically means having a plan, writing a script, executing things to the best of your ability. So some of these details are for your benefit, like having a script in advance. Next is the audio PSA. It's basically similar to the video PSA. It's a completely audio format. Again, it's 1 to 3 minutes. It also requires a script and music or sound effects to enhance things. This you might want to think about in terms of like, the things you hear on the radio. I think PSAs are probably less common on the radio than they used to be, but probably you've heard examples of audio PSAs. PSAs don't sell products. That's what commercials do, but it's sort of similar in a commercial in terms of, a 1 to 2 minute focused audio piece that delivers a message. Some people find variations on the audio piece. So they might create a mock radio style show. They might create like a mock interview where one person is interviewing another about an important industry matter, and it's through that interview that we get the PSA message. So you have options. You can create a more straightforward, professional, almost commercial-like piece that you would hear on the radio, or you can have fun with the format and find some sort of innovative way to deliver the information. Next up is the comic. To create a short comic, this one does not require text, a script, just because all the text that you'll create will be in the comic itself. You can hand draw your comic, or you can use a comic generating program. I have no problem with whichever route you take. I will say that, fair or not, listen, I'm most interested in how clearly your PSA topic and message comes across. If you can do that, the bulk of the points for the public service announcement you will be able to earn. But there is this other smaller element, but it still is something I take into consideration, which is the overall quality of the project. Again, it's not that I set the bar super high. I just want you to create the best project that you can. But I do consider things like, and yes, I have to guess to a certain degree, but I consider things like, how much effort does it look like it took this student to create this public service announcement versus this other student and her public service announcement? And yes, it's problematic because I'll never be able to answer those questions with 100% accuracy. But for example, with a comic, I have no problem whether you hand draw it or you use one of those online tools like Bitstrips or Pixton or Powtoon. But do understand that there's a difference, right? I mean, I understand that the person who sits down carefully draws things, scans it into a program like Photoshop or Illustrator, finishes it up, adds professional style lettering. Like that takes a lot of effort. And using an online tool is a bit easier. I think it has its own challenges. I think a lot of these online tools, and I'll give a list of them later in the session, they're awesome. And if you get underneath the hood of these programs, they can do amazing things, and you can create amazing things. But they're sort of easy to also use a bit generically. Like the online tools are incredibly easy to use if you want to create something simple and quick. But just recognize that, yeah, again, fair or not, I kind of look at PSAs not against one another, but yes, in comparison to one another. So you can hand draw or you can use an online program, but both come with their benefits and challenges. The game PSA I'm going to skip for now and just say that if you're interested in this option, contact me. So few people work on this option that I'd rather just speak to those people one-on-one. But basically, you'll create a short video game, typically using something like I don't know, RPG Maker. And then the game itself delivers a PSA image. But because I see it so rarely, I prefer to speak to people specifically about that. The next one is a song or a jingle. So you'll compose a 2 to 5 minute song based on your PSA. This option requires lyrics to be included. And there are more details here, like you can use a band, you can bring in friends to help you out with instruments or singing, but you should be the one writing the song and you should be the one singing the song, and obviously you should be writing the lyrics. The song is probably one of my favorite ones to look at. I mean, I like looking at all the different PSAs that come in. The song, for whatever reason, I like a lot. Maybe it's because it might be the most challenging of all the options, just because a song for this project, in order to be successful, the song needs to be like 100% literal. Like this is not your opportunity to try to show that you're this generation's Bob Dylan or that you're an abstract lyrical genius, right? This assignment requires almost a complete opposite. And because songwriters don't typically work that way, they're not used to be given the task of, you must write on this topic with this message with very, very little room to sort of be abstract or playful. That's a real challenge. And again, I hate to keep comparing things to a commercial because a commercial sells a product, a PSA delivers a message. But again, the comparison is useful because think about the typical jingles you hear for, like, McDonald's or other things that are sold, right? I mean, there's no confusion about what the song's message is. And likewise, the PSA, that's the real challenge if you choose the song option. Your song has to be 100% literal. It shouldn't be fuzzy in the slightest, and it should be incredibly direct in the message it tries to send. And finally, if none of these options sound great to you, you do have the option of pitching your own idea. You just need to sort of get in touch with me and let me know what you're thinking about working on, and then I'll either say yes or no. Examples of people who've pitched ideas in the past. Some people work on infographics. Infographics are kind of similar to what you see in this document here, although this document's a little bit text heavy, but it's usually a useful combination of image and text that are both working together in sort of a reader-friendly way to deliver information. Infographics are great, for example, for instructions or for, like, you go into a doctor's office, there might be an infographic in the form of a poster on the wall that's showing the steps for, I don't know, everything from the Heimlich maneuver to healthy eating. So infographics I sometimes get pitches on. Websites, people are interested in web design. Graphic design students, and it's pretty much only graphic design students that I ever give permission to. But sometimes I've had people work on sort of print ad style PSAs. But most of you, 98% of you, are going to be choosing something in one of these four categories: video, audio, comic, song. You can read through the rest of the option sheet on your own, but just, it gives you useful reminders, so please go through it. Like remembering that Full Sail has PG-13 guidelines, so we refrain from using ugly language. Plus, for a PSA, I'm not sure why you would want to use language that's questionable. Reminders: you need to write and produce the project yourself. All work has to be new and specific to this class. Okay, so you're not handing in a song you wrote 10 years ago and passing it off as a PSA. You can only use images, video, audio, or music that belongs to you. And when I say belongs to you, I mean created by you, not that you bought a Beyonce CD and so you use Beyonce's music in your PSA. No, you can't do that. So anything that appears in your PSA has to either be created by you or it needs to be, you have to have permission to be able to use it. Okay. Yeah, but you guys know most of this stuff. We hammer that home pretty hard here at Full Sail. Okay, so quiz question number 2. What format will you use to turn your Appeal for Action essay into a multimedia project for the final project? Wow, that's a lot of words to say. Basically, which project option are you choosing? Okay. Video, audio, comic, song, or your own idea that you're pitching. Okay, tell me which one you think you're gonna work on. You can change later on, by the way, but I want you to more or less choose now. This class moves very fast. That's why it's so important to have a topic pretty much locked into place at the very latest by the middle of week 2, and it's probably pretty important to choose your format fairly early, because by design this week is pretty free. You have peer review, you have a quiz associated with this go-to session. Otherwise, week 3 is pretty much open to you. Week 4, you only have the week 4 go-to quiz, and then you have the entire week to work on your final projects. So by design, the final 2 weeks of this course are more open, to give you as much time as possible to think, to plan, to create, and to execute your final public service announcement. Okay, some other reminders. Pathos, logos, ethos. Just kind of remember this stuff. Remember back in week 1, I joked that I don't care if you remember the fancy Greek words, you just need to remember the gist behind them. So keep these things in mind. Like, how will you reach your target audience? Literally, put yourself in their shoes. Like, what sorts of things will convince them the best? And this might also be a good time to introduce what I like to call the stranger test. By the way, that's my own term, so nobody else would ever have any idea what I'm talking about. But I have this thing that I call the stranger test, which means when you create your final public service announcement and hand it in, when I sit down to watch your video, listen to your audio piece, read your comic, listen to your song, I am going to pretend that I don't know you. I don't know about Full Sail. I don't know about this class. I don't know anything. All I know is that I'm going to listen to or watch or read a public service announcement. And it should make sense to me. Okay, that's why I call it the stranger test. I should be able to grab, accost any stranger just walking down the street, have them look at your public service announcement, and they should understand it. Okay, even though we've talked a lot about target audience, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't make sense to even like the general person. That hug don't slug billboard that we looked at a couple slides back, I'm not the target audience for that. I'm not involved in domestic violence, but I understand the message. Same thing when I'm watching television. What's like cyberbullying. I've been seeing public service announcements either about bullying, literally bullying, or a kind of online harassment, which is a different form of bullying. Like, I'm not the target audience for that message. That message isn't trying to really reach me, but I understand it. It makes complete sense to me. So your PSAs kind of need to do the same thing. So yeah, when I talk about things like audience or pathos, logos, and ethos, they're not just abstract terms. They're not sort of textbook terms that, the instructor's mentioning these things, but I don't care, or it just sounds like fancy words to me. No. Like, literally, you should be thinking about these matters, because if you're trying to reach an audience, you'll have to consider what's the most effective way of doing so. Okay, quiz question number 3. How will your chosen format appeal to your target audience? And be specific, okay? Give me a sense of what your multimedia PSA will need to do to be successful as a song, video, comic, or audio piece. I understand that your plans might change. You might have an idea of what you're going to do now that you might not be able to execute, or it might need to be tweaked, or it might need to be altered. That's fine, but I want you to start thinking and planning now. So that's what this quiz question is designed to do. Be specific about what your PSA will need to do, not just in general, but as a song, a video, a comic, etc. Okay, so I'm looking for answers that go beyond, oh, my piece will have to be funny because I've experience has taught me that people like to laugh, or my PSA will need to be informative. Yeah, we get that. I know, but specifically, what will your, if you choose, for example, the comic option, what will your comic need to do to be successful, given your topic? Will it have to tell a story? Will it have to be both emotional and factual, because that's what people would need to hear? So I want you to start brainstorming, planning, and giving me a sense of what you're thinking of. That's what this quiz question is designed to do. Okay, creative sources that you can use. Compfight.com. This is an image site. I'm going to go there right now. If you need images, by the way, you should be taking and creating as much as you can. People have such amazing tools. Your phones can do so much. But yeah, I mean, grab your phone, or if you have a camera, grab your camera, or your what do they call them? Your video recorder or whatever. Go out and take your own footage. That said, if you need to use some images to either round things out or what have you, I strongly recommend compfight.com. It's a Flickr search tool, but the awesome thing about compfight.com is that it only produces results that are allowable. Okay, so if you need to use an image or two in your project, it should either be coming from a source like compfight.com, or remember the AP images database over at the Full Sail Library. For DGL, you had a couple projects where you had to go to the library, use the AP images database, find appropriate images. Okay, so you can go there as well, the AP images. But the great thing about Compfight is that, for example, I'm just going to do a search for puppies, because who doesn't love puppies? And I'm going to wait 10 hours for puppies to come up. And if they don't come up, that's fine. Things are running a little bit slow on my end. If not, I can show it next week. We'll come back to Compfight, because next week we'll return to APA style. You thought we were done, but we're not. Okay, we're in. But yeah, next week we'll talk about how to cite images in APA style. Okay, so we're in here. The useful thing is that if I go to the left, I have this option of choosing any license, Creative Commons or commercial. I need to click commercial. I could click Creative Commons, but technically it's a little bit difficult to explain. But because Full Sail University is technically a for-profit college, I should be using commercial. But Creative Commons, that's fine too. But you don't want to click on any license, because what we're looking here is specifically images that are some rights reserved, not all rights reserved. By the way, anything above this dotted line here is just basically a plug for another site, so don't go there. You should not have to pay for things. Okay. Oh, wow, so many cute guys. Here, let's click on this one. It doesn't really matter which photo I choose. Okay, so here we go, right? Some rights reserved. That's what we want to see. If it says all rights reserved, we can't use it. Okay, but some rights reserved means we can use it as long as we give credit. And next week we'll talk more about this. We'll revisit this topic and we'll show how we need to cite this image in APA style. For now, though, I just want to show you where you can find stuff. So compfight.com, AP images over at the database. If you think you found another Creative Commons source, run it by me so I can double check. But yeah, the goal here is that you can't just Google whatever you want. For example, if I Google images of puppies in Google, right? I get this. Lots of pictures of puppies. But here's the problem. If I start clicking on these, I don't know if I really am allowed to use them. Some of these might be copyrighted images, right? So if you go through AP Images or compfight.com, you know that you're only using allowable materials. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. Just Googling stuff and taking whatever we think we can. That's not right. Let me take a quick sip from my soda. And the same thing applies to music, by the way. Okay. So many great songs on the charts right now. Taylor Swift's "Blank Space," love that song. It's calming down a little bit, but Megan Trainor's all about that bass. Great song. What's that one by Charlie XCX? Boom Clap. Oh, I love that song. So many great songs out there. But here's the thing: I don't want to hear them in your public service announcements. Okay, any copyrighted stuff, whether it's an image, whether it's a song, whether it's a clip from a movie or television show, it cannot appear in your public service announcement. So keep that in mind, okay? So when some of the projects require, for example, like background music or sound effects, that means background music or sound effects that either you created or comes from an allowable source. It doesn't mean you running to your CD collection to grab your favorite song so it plays in the background of your PSA. That's copyright violation, and anywhere that would be a big deal. But here at Full Sail, it is a huge deal because all of you are entering industries where these issues will be prominent, right? You won't be able to go into graphic design and just use whatever image you want in a brochure or a company's materials. Um, if you're in music, you already know that this is controversial. Same thing with other fields. You won't just be able to grab materials that aren't yours and use them without receiving a permission. So yeah, we stress this big time at Full Sail. Where was I? Okay, so Confide is great for images. Westar. Uh, this is a source you have. I should have set it up in advance. It's Full Sail Connect. I'm gonna go back to the library databases. But you have this tool called Westar Music, and it's awesome because normally the tracks that are included here would cost you anywhere from like $15 to $60, but as a Full Sail student, you get them for free. So why not take advantage? Okay, so I'm in the research databases, just like you would go to find an article for your essay. If you scroll down though, you'll see there it is, Westar Music. Okay. Okay, and George gave a site. I'd have to check that one out. Not that I don't believe you, George, but yeah, I mean that's a site where like if you find something like that, run it by me so I can take a close look at it. But yeah, there are other sources out there that, I mean, that's the great thing about 2015 is we live in a much more sharing environment. People just realize that if we're going to be so dependent on the internet and social media, where sharing and media files are so important, that it seems sort of unfair if people just have no way to participate in that. So the great thing is that we have so many sound banks and image banks and various tools that are designed to be free, to be shared, to be used by all. So yeah, I plug specifically a couple important places like compfight.com. But yeah, the bigger message is that we just don't use stuff that's copyrighted. Okay, so I'm in Westar. I'm gonna go ahead and log in just to be safe. Okay. But here you'll see that you have lots of music to choose from, and you can tell that it's sort of that kind of generic, I don't know, elevator music type thing, because they're organized by title albums, but the albums have these sort of corny titles like Rock, Pride of Place, or Rock on the Easy Side. Okay, but the cool thing is that maybe this stuff isn't as hip as what you'll hear like on the charts, but for background music, it more than serves a purpose. Okay, so you can go into each of the different albums, choose what sort of style is best. Most people know this, but sometimes it's shocking to hear a PSA that's supposed to be somber and serious, and there's like a really intense, loud EDM track playing in the background. So yeah, think about appropriateness. Uh, but once you find a song, it's really as simple as it's just downloading a song, going through the checkout process. Because you're a Full Sail student, you won't actually have to pay anything. You'll just need to complete the checkout process, and then I believe you get like an MP3 file downloaded, and then we can use it. Eric says, if we use Bitstrip, do we use Western on the strip? No, for the comic option, there really isn't a need to add sound elements unless you really want to and can figure out how to do that. But I haven't played along with Bitstrips enough to know if you can add music. Powtoon, which I'll show in just a second, that one actually has built-in music files. If you pay for their premium service, you get a whole bunch of sound files. But even their just basic membership comes with like I think a handful of free music tracks. And for Powtoon, by the way, are people familiar with Powtoon? Have you all heard of that? It's a pretty cool tool. Uh, Powtoon. It's awesome because it's technically presentation software, kind of like PowerPoint or Keynote, but it looks nothing like those styles. Um, it literally is like animation come to life. So it's almost like a presentation that's brought to life through animation, which is great because it kind of has that sort of film or video quality to it. Right? It feels more like you're watching an animated film than an actual presentation. And yeah, those are. By the way, if you ever want to, you should visit Powtoon on YouTube. There are probably 10 billion Powtoon videos. So if you want to see what they look like, it might be worth checking out. But if you've seen a Powtoon before, then you probably know it's pretty awkward to watch if there is no sound whatsoever, because it kind of feels like you're watching a silent film. So yeah, for something like Powtoon, because there's movement involved, because it feels like animation or a film, we kind of expect sound. But for a static comic like Bitstrips, music, yeah, it's not a requirement. The other ones I'm not going to show, but Pixton, that's another comic generator. Bitstrips, yet another one. Powtoon, we took a close look at. GoAnimate is another animation tool. And again, they're all awesome tools. I have no problem with people using online tools to create things. Just keep in mind what I said earlier, which is, it's not that I look at one project as being better than another, but I just recognize the person who spends time drawing, scanning, uploading to their computer, polishing, perfecting, is doing something a bit different than someone who goes to like bitstrips.com and creates a comic. Neither format is better than the other, but I do understand that there are different levels of perhaps involvement to consider. And by the way, Pixton, Bitstrips, Powtoon, again, if you really use these tools to their full potential, then yes, they become just as challenging as any other sort of format. But yeah, I don't mean to be negative. We just talked earlier in the session about about staying positive. But yeah, I think one of the challenges with these online tools is that you use them creatively to produce what you need to create, rather than just using the tools because they're easy to use. Does that make sense? Let's see, Jordan. Let's see, do a video here. Okay, there people in the chat are still talking about the comic option. Okay, quiz question number 4. What tools and technologies will you use to complete your final project? Okay, so be specific. Again, what sorts of, and when I say tools and technologies, I mean in the broadest sense possible. What are you going to use to write your script? What are you going to use to capture footage? What are you going to use to edit all this stuff? What are you going to use in terms of sound files? Some of you might not have as much stuff to explain, okay? If you're going to do everything in Powtoon, you probably don't have that many outside things to mention. But for many of you, you should have probably a healthy list of things to consider. Uh, I need to eliminate this slide. We'll actually get into this next week because this is important. I don't want to overwhelm people with APA because it seems like we just went over so much just in terms of how to set up the document, how to create references. But we do need to revisit APA, but we won't do that this week. We'll do that next week in week 4. That any images or sound files that you use have to be cited in the APA format. And we'll talk about that next week. Oops, there is no quiz question number 5. Question time. Again, we've talked about a lot. We covered it all. Peer review, the different options you have for your final project, what the final projects ultimately are trying to do. So questions. Now's the time to ask them. And if people don't have questions, I'm going to assume that, again, my explanations were so clear, so riveting, so lucid that people have just zero questions. Uh, Eric sent me a private message, so I'll wait to respond to that. Other people, okay, as usual, if you don't have questions, if you sincerely are okay, you don't, you feel like you understood everything, then certainly you're free to go. Enjoy the rest of your evening. But I'll hang out for a little bit and discuss. Eric, your message to me isn't really that private, so I don't mind answering it out loud. Your APA, the PowerPoint presentation, APA PowerPoint Basics wasn't working on your end. Is there a way to get it to you? That's a good question. What happens on your end? Like, is it just not opening at all, or does it look funny? I mean, do you think it's a problem with your machine or the format of R? I'm trying to think. What are the best ways? Should I resave it in a different format or something? Hmm. Comes with massive And Eric, do you have the official version? Like, do you have PowerPoint, or are you trying to open it with some sort of third-party software like Open Office or? Because that can sometimes be a problem. I've seen people who try to. Oh, okay, you have Microsoft PowerPoint for Mac. Um, yeah, that's crazy. I'm not sure why that would. I'm trying to think of workarounds, and if you can think of something that you think I should be doing or trying, let me know. Because if I need to send it to you, let me see. Where do I have the AP? Okay, and I think I have this saved